Hello Year 11, my name is Miss Brown and I'm one of the Religious Studies Consultants for Harris Federation. Welcome to your first GCSE Religious Studies revision video. We've designed these videos to help support you with preparing for your exam, and we'll be following your revision checklists as we go through these. If you don't have a revision checklist or you're not sure where yours are, ask a Religious Studies teacher and they will be able to help you. Our first video is focusing on the idea of God as being omnipotent, loving, and just for Christians. We're going to have a look at God as omnipotent to start off with, and as we go through each of these different attributes of God, we're going to focus on the definition, two beliefs about God having that quality, the way in which this belief might influence a Christian, and also a quote. And the reason for this is that by covering all of these areas, you will be able to answer any 1 mark, 4 mark, or 6 mark question that comes up in your exam. So first of all, what does the word omnipotent mean? Well, it's the belief that God is all powerful. For Christians, what does this mean if we unpick it a bit further? Well, two beliefs about this is firstly, with this power, it enables God to be able to create the universe out of nothing. So unlike humans who need to be able to create things out of material, God is able to create something out of nothing. Sometimes we call that ex nihilo. Secondly, God continues to work in the world, and his omnipotence allows him to continue to sustain that world despite being outside of it. So those are two beliefs that you could use linking to God's omnipotence. How does a belief in God as omnipotent influence a Christian? Well, lots of different ways, but here are two. Firstly, if God is all-powerful, then that might influence a Christian to worship God. If he's the most powerful being in existence, then he is the being that is worthy of that worship. Secondly, it might influence them to pray to God, because that power might enable him to answer those prayers if that's part of his plan. If we think about a quote that we can use here, there's a really nice one from the Bible that says, "With God, all things are possible." And that just really emphasizes that idea of what it means to be all-powerful. The second attribute that you need to know is God as loving, or as some of you might have been taught, omnibenevolent. This is the Christian belief that God is all-loving. Two beliefs about this. Well, firstly, Christians believe that God sacrificed his son Jesus to save humans. This, for Christians, is the ultimate act of love, that God was willing to make a huge sacrifice in order to save Christians from their sins because he cares and loves about them. Secondly, God's love for creation is unconditional according to Christians. Sometimes we call this agape love, and this means that it's not based on the actions or behaviour of humans. In other words, God will love his creation despite the fact that they make mistakes, despite the fact that they sin. So how might these beliefs influence Christians today? Well, firstly, Christians might pray to God to give thanks. Thanks for the sacrifice of Jesus that enables them to be saved from their sins and go to heaven in the afterlife to be reunited with God. Secondly, it might influence Christians to be loving towards others. They might want to emulate that love on earth. As God is loving to his creation, they will want to show that love to others. And that's also shown in Jesus' teachings when he encourages people to show love to one another. A great quote that you can use to remember this is God is love. So for Christians, that ultimate agape love, God is love. Really nice quote to remember. And finally, the third attribute that you need to know for the exam is the belief that God is just. This is the belief for Christians that God is fair. And what that means is that, for example, when everyone has to face God on Judgment Day, according to Christianity, that God will be the ultimate judge. Everybody will have to answer to him. Secondly, due to the idea of God being fair, it means that that judgment will be a fair judgment, that everyone will be judged in a fair and equal way. So the decision about where they spend their afterlife will be a just decision. How might this influence Christians today? Well, first of all, they might pray to God to ask for forgiveness of their sins. They know that God will take into account, as a just God, the mistakes that they have made if they are truly sorry for them. So seeking forgiveness and reflecting on actions will be an important impact on the lives of Christians on their time on earth. Secondly, they might want to treat others fairly, again emulating that quality of fairness. If they're expecting to be treated fairly and judged fairly themselves, then it's important that they also mirror that fairness in their day-to-day life. And again, this is going to help them lead a good life and avoid punishment in the afterlife. A nice quote that you can use in your exam to help you with this one is, "He is a God of justice." In other words, he is a God of fairness. I'm going to focus on some 4 and 5 mark question examples for you now so that you can see what this might look like if it comes up as a question in the exam. There are 3 possible questions on the board there for your 4 mark questions. Remember that these will always be asking you about the influence that a belief has on Christians in the beliefs section of the paper. So that means in our answer, we need to be thinking about the impact that that belief has. In other words, how might it make a Christian feel, or what might it make them do? There are 3 possible questions there. We're going to go through one, but if you would like to have a go at some, I'd recommend setting a 4-minute timer and then having a go at completing these in time conditions. You can then take those answers to your teacher and they will be able to mark them for you. Here is an example of what an answer to question number 1 might look like. Explain 2 ways in which the belief in God as omnipotent influences Christians today. Christians could be influenced to worship God. This is because God is believed to be the most important being in the universe and creator of everything. Therefore, he is worthy of worship. Christians could also pray to God in times of need to ask for help. This is because God has the power to intervene and answer prayers to help them. Here, this student has given 2 clear influences, which I've highlighted in yellow. An action there to worship God and a second action specifically there to pray to God. The extra marks have come from the development of those points by expanding on what that would look like and why a Christian might do that. So just like a 4-mark question, a 6-mark question will still ask you to explain 2 key religious beliefs. Where you get those extra 2 marks from is by including a reference to a source of authority, which could be a quote, for example, and then applying or explaining how that quote links to the question. On the screen, you will see 3 example questions. We're going to go through one together and then you can have a chance to do some on your own. So this is the question we're going to look at together. Explain 2 Christian teachings about God as loving. Refer to sacred writings or another source of Christian belief and teaching in your answer. Christians believe that God loves humans unconditionally through agape love. This can be seen in the Bible, where it teaches that God is love. This means that his love is not dependent on the behaviour of humans or the choices that they make. Christians believe that God demonstrated his love through the sacrifice of Jesus. His willingness to make the ultimate sacrifice to save mankind is proof of his love for his creation. So let's break this down a little bit. In this first section, we can gain 4 marks. The first mark comes from our point that God loves humans unconditionally. We develop this point with the quote that God is love, making sure that we reference where that quote comes from, so in this case the Bible, otherwise you will not get that mark. That's so important to include that. This means that his love is not dependent on the behaviour of humans or the choices that they make. So you have your first point, which is a simple point. You develop it with an explanation. You have a quote there, and you have explained that quote, so that gets you 4 marks. Your final 2 marks come from the second point, which is that God demonstrated his love through that sacrifice of Jesus, and then developing and explaining what that means. That is the structure that you need to use to get 6 out of 6. What I'd like you to do now is to pause the video on the previous slide where you have those other practice questions and give those ones a go using the same structure.